Have you found any good ways of managing the actual process of getting holdovers from 25 reps in a way that actually like doesn't drive you insane?
You're insane if you're in ops, period. So that's never necessarily gonna be the answer.
Hey everybody, it's Hayes Davis here with Joe Ort, and we're going to be talking about territories today. Really excited to talk about this. It's a thing we've talked a lot about in uncharted territory in a bunch of different ways. But Joe, let's hear from you. Good little intro. We'll get started.
I've spent 15 years in revenue operations. I started my career at Serious Decisions. So understanding how alignment is key to driving growth and profitability. Bounced around to a few different private equity firms since then, and recently started my own business trying to coach and guide Series A to C companies on what does good look like from a go-to-market perspective. And, I've been building territories for the last, 14, 15 years, spending the time, fighting with the data, working with, sales managers and reps for all the negotiations that happen. So it's definitely something that took some of the hair off the top of my head and put some grays on my face.
I think we're in the same camp for that. So I would love to get your take on what a good territory process looks like as part of, a larger planning effort. And we'll mix it up a little bit later on whether or not like when to use maybe more traditional territories versus like different approaches, that kind of thing. But let's say we're talking about, what most of us think of as like the territory carve. We're trying to figure out how we want to balance things out. We're trying to allocate, whether it's patches or verticals or whatever to folks. So I'd love to hear like describe to me your perfect territory building process, and then we'll talk about all the ways that I'm sure it never goes perfectly.
Yeah, and the first part is just even look at the way you segment the business entirely. So, are you doing enterprise, commercial? Like what do those segments look like? Does it make sense to do a vertical like approach? All those kinds of conversations need to happen up front. So, what's the strategy? How are we going after it? That's going to go into, again, how are you resourcing it? So how many territories do you need to carve for? All those types of things you need to make sure from just a strategy standpoint, you have that aligned. And then assuming we've got that done and you can do some of this stuff in parallel, you got to clean up your data. So the worst thing you want to do is give somebody a patch. Do all this analysis and it comes back and like, well, these are all, businesses that aren't even in business, like around anymore. They've all been acquired or whatever. So a lot of the heavy lifting is on that data side. Just make sure you've got clean things that you can handle the hierarchies. And then, included in that other part is probably how you can handle your multinationals. So do you want to have, Europe is totally separate, or if I own IBM, I own IBM everywhere. So you have to make sure you have those kind of rules of engagement in place with the segmentation side of it. But the data part is super difficult. It's super hard. And it also depends on how you're segmenting the business. So if you want it to be, country specific in Europe, make sure you have locations categorized that way so that you can have that language specific type of thing. And then the hierarchies, and then whatever the other components are that drive what does good look like for a prospect. So like the ICP stuff, you have way more ability to get deeper now than you ever did before. So it's not just size of company, industry, the simple things that we did in the past. That's always one thing that you start with, but there's way more things that you can dig into now that really determine what's a qualified prospect look like. Because a lot of companies will come in, hey, we've got, a $300 billion TAM or some crazy number. And then it's, okay, what can you actually go and target? Then people start to say, okay, well, our ICP, or like our ideal customer profile looks like this. Well, I would say even within that ICP, there are customers, there are prospects in there that are better prospects for you. So how do you get down to what your total relevant market is that you can sell to now? So that's going to take your huge TAM, start to narrow it down to your ICP, and then you get down into the best prospects. And the question is like, how do you do that? And you have to make sure that you're looking not just the top of funnel stuff. So what's our win rate? Our ASPs are typically things I see used to determine, hey, this is what a good prospect looks like. But because I'm typically working in SaaS, it's what's on the back end. Do these companies renew? Are we able to expand them? So I've seen the places where they just go off of like, customer spend. That's how they segment it. Well, if you've got a huge company with low spend, but there's a huge amount of potential, why are you giving that to your lower end of the market reps, that type of thing? So making sure you've got some way to categorize those things. But it's one of those where, what are the additional data points that we should go and collect early on? So I was at Brainshark, which was a sales enablement technology. And one of the things for us was, do they have a sales enablement function? If they don't, not a good prospect for us. If they do, great. If they have one person, not as good as 2+. So all those little things come into play of how do you start to score things. And there's AI can obviously help out a ton of this. I tried to use data scientists in the past where let's pull some data from HD Insights. Let's look at the job openings. Are they mentioning different technologies that we integrate with? What are all those different qualifying characteristics that can help you identify these are the best of the best, looking at your acquisition funnel, but also the expansion side. So the data side of it, that's, you look at the iceberg of territory planning, all that stuff underwater is a bulk of the work. It's a bulk of the effort. And then you end up getting to the territories. But that's the biggest piece to me, is just making sure you've got all that stuff locked up.
So I want to dig into this a little bit, because I think one of the things that's really important is order of operations here, right? You've also got just dependencies everywhere, right? Dependencies on people for the decisions that they make, dependencies on, your reps are asking for this holdover, which means that you've got to like change things downstream, right? And so you have this butterfly effect, where like a few small changes up at the beginning have a big impact on the outcome. Two big things that I think are really important that you touched on is you want to go into a territory design and territory effort with what your strategy is, driving things, but also with the data that you want to use to help inform that. And so my question, which I swear I'm getting to here, is the strategy and the data are often linked to each other, right? If I'm trying to determine, should I go up market, for example, and where do I draw the line of what becomes my enterprise segment or not my enterprise segment, I need enough data around all the accounts I've sold and pitched to and all of that to start to understand how to inform that decision. So when you're thinking about actually laying out like a set of, whether it's meetings or a timeline or kind of an approach to this, like really getting in the weeds, how do you try to untangle all of those things? Like, do you, for example, set aside like a period at the beginning to really focus in on data, or do you need to start with a meeting with VP of sales and say like, what's your big strategy idea? Like, how do you untangle all of that? Walk me through a timeline, especially early on, because a lot of people are right now thinking about kicking this process off. So how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, the first part, we would try to do as much of the data stuff as we can up front, and then you give an initial analysis to the leadership team that's going to be making the decisions on what the strategy is. So, hey, this is how we've got the business segmented out so far. This is the performance that we've seen. So you're looking at things like how many accounts are in that bucket, how many, depending on your setup, if you're going to large organizations, like how many unique businesses are there versus, like the business unit level. So you look at those types of things, you look at your customer base, you look at current ACB, and then you start to look at, okay, what's the potential of those accounts, and then add in whatever additional metrics that make sense. So your win rates, your like lead volumes, ASPs, cycle times, renewal rates, like your GRR and your NRR. So we lay all that stuff out and look at, okay, this is what the current performance is of these things, and some things are going to jump out at you. So an example, a couple places ago, we were selling mostly to $1 billion and up organizations. So you're like, okay, these are all big. Yes, but we still called it like emerging or small for the lower end of the market. But then we started looking, okay, hey, the win rates aren't as good down in this area. So then for the analysis side of it, okay, you did that initial view, you've prepared it. Before you go into that meeting with leadership, it's like, okay, why are these numbers lower? And we did a lot of that stuff early on too. It's like, hey, we weren't hitting targets. Why? Okay, well, the volume is coming in this segment, and we weren't seeing the throughput that we were expecting. So we kind of had a sense that there's something going on in there. So we started just diving deeper to really understand, okay, what's going on with this one segment. So it could be, hey, we're selling to healthcare. This part of healthcare is doing really well, and parts not, but we've been getting more of our lead volume from this one. So those kinds of things, making sure you come into that prepared so that when you go and say, hey, this is what we're currently seeing, here's a proposal for what we think new segmentation might look like for the following year. at least a way to get ahead of some of those things where you do the analysis, you come with at least an approach. The team can change it. It's not, we're not saying that, hey, this is what we want and that this is why. It's saying, hey, this is an approach that we think could be something that solves for the issues that we're seeing. So trying to get that piece done as early as you can, because there's a whole lot of iteration going on. You're never really done with this stuff until you even get to the end of the year. So you might land some of these customers by the end of the year. So then, all right, well, that comes down of what the attainable pool is for the next fiscal. Trying to get that meeting as early as possible. And you have to figure out, how do we get all the data like cleaned, all the segmentation stuff, get all that stuff up front, have that initial meeting, and then you got to project plan the rest of this. Okay, what are the additional things that we need to solve for? Rules of engagement around holdovers. We need to let them keep it for the whole year, to keep it for a certain time period. What's going to be our approach for territories? Do we want to limit turnover of reps, or do we not care about that? How do we want to do it? Do we want to, I know you don't like geo-based stuff. It doesn't make sense to me either with everybody being remote. Or if we have like the best accounts, how do we start to split those things up? Do we have just like a separate pool of, hey, these aren't attached to reps. This is like the tier B kind of accounts. We've assigned all the tier A's to everybody. So they're really focused on what they're doing, and have the tier B's in there. What's the checkout look like? You can only have 20, 50, 100 something accounts that you're working, and you start to, okay, I'm going to check this one back in. That one's not good. I found out they just signed with a competitor. I want to get another one. Hey, what does that kind of stuff look like? So you have to make sure you've got all those questions, at least an initial list of those, as early as possible, because it, again, drives how you're going to do the planning. And then typically what we do is try to have RevOps do the first pass at all this. Okay, this is what the general direction is. Go out and start to build for us. And then you start at the top level. So like CRO, VP of sales level. Hey, this is the initial cuts of this. This is what it looks like. Here are some of the risks that we see in some of this. You'll iterate on that again, and then probably go down, and you start working your way down the organization until you get down to the first level sales managers, because those guys know actually what's happening in a lot of these accounts versus a lot of the stuff that we're going to do from an ops standpoint. It's a very data driven thing versus what qualitative information do we not have access to. So you have to figure out, like, what are all the checkpoints that we need to have along the way. If we need to go live by whatever date in January, and you start to work back with all the steps with the different levels, that's how you build out what that goal is. But it has to be in tune with tops down planning. So it's a target setting. So, are we going to need additional sellers? It's got to be tied in with comp plans. So everything is all just intertwined with planning, but it's a big piece of it.
Yeah. So I want to go back to, so there's a whole bunch of that to unpack, and I think to me, this process has there's a ton of quantitative elements, and then there's a ton of like subjective, like on the ground opinions / informed ideas about what to do. Right. And so I think, one of the things that I see a lot of RevOps folks struggle with is how to incorporate and balance that subjective or kind of opinionated feedback that they're getting from the reps and the managers with trying to find something that's quantitatively optimal, right? And so where I've seen this process go wrong sometimes is we say, hey, we're going to let reps designate a handful of holdovers or something like that, right? But then the reps revolt and they're like saying like, no, we need to keep all of these accounts. And then suddenly, effectively, they're exercising kind of a veto on like what you're actually trying to do from a balancing standpoint. And then with managers, there's some horse trading that goes on. There's kind of like, well, this should go to my person, or no, this should go to my person, that sort of things. What would be your advice to somebody who's in RevOps and dealing with some really headstrong managers or some really headstrong reps who are like, no, I need this, or this needs to go to my people?
I agree. The horse trading, that's always fun, especially if you have like vertical pieces and you have these multi specialty kind of companies. Definitely it's difficult. In the end, you got to have who's the decision maker. If that's going to be the CRO or whoever. So you can have some guidance. Hey, we're giving you can have 5 or 10 accounts total that you can hold, and that's what it is. If this opportunity closes by this date, then you're good. Otherwise, maybe we'll do like a 50-50. If there's some sort of like guidance, But then the CRO, whoever ends up being the decision maker, they have to have the final call that, you know, this is what it's going to be. So obviously, you always partner with the head of the person that's going to be in charge of, like, do we get to that number? They have to have the final call on it. And you know, there is the balance between, you know, what's fair versus pulling some of the inputs in, because you don't want to just have that one rep that had like this really great territory hold on to everything, and then it makes it harder for other reps to be able to achieve if they aren't hitting those accounts anyways. You know, there's probably some things that we can say, I know you want to hold these 20 accounts, but you haven't touched half of those in the last 6 months, so we're going to pull them. And it's an easy kind of reason why, but you got to have, in the end, who's the decision maker on this. It's just like any other project, like whether it's like, hey, this is what we're recommending, who's like agreeing with the plan, who's giving like the input, and then like who's the deciding person. There's somebody that has the final decision. Make sure everyone knows who that is early on, and it's not going to be a rep.
Integrating, you know, all that feedback is kind of a nasty manual process as well. Like, is your opinion like the state of the art really is like, hey, let's like put this in a spreadsheet and have like people like tag, like, I want to keep these accounts, that kind of thing. Like, I'm just curious how you've done it in the past, because I keep seeing people like searching for like, how do we make this better? And it still feels like it's, you know, it's a manual, like spreadsheet driven process. Have you found any good ways of managing the actual process of getting holdovers from 25 reps in a way that actually like doesn't drive you insane?
You're insane if you're in ops, period. So that's never necessarily gonna be the answer. But I think there's enough tools out there that you trying to get out of spreadsheet, because it's just so hard, especially trying to do scenario modeling. Like, hey, if we do it this way, it's gonna look like this. If we do it this way, it's gonna look like this. You're gonna end up with 58 different columns in your spreadsheet of how you try to calculate things. It's just too much. I think there's tools out there, and it's one of those things that this is important enough that companies should invest in this topic as early as they can. Like, once it gets to a level of complexity, if you're doing stuff and, you know, you've got 10 sellers, you probably don't need something necessarily. But as you get larger, you have to make an investment in something like that. Otherwise, it's just gonna be too difficult and too hard to maintain, especially if you're gonna want multiple people working on things. So like, you've got multiple managers underneath trying to move stuff around. Say, okay, this actually, this should be owned by someone else. Like, you want to have that review kind of things. If you've got a tool that, okay, they can make that relationship. Okay, it's going to go back and update the CRM, all those types of things. It'll just make the whole thing more efficient, so that go forward is there. You don't have to go do some uploads. So I think once it gets to a certain level of complexity, you have to use a tool that's going to make this stuff simpler.
So I want to go back to something you mentioned on the data side, because this has been something that has come up in a ton of my conversations, and it's something that, you know, I've seen as well. But one of the places I feel like data always really trips people up, aside from kind of the ICP, like, are they actually a good fit or not, is in hierarchies. Like, hierarchies seem to be the bane of every territory design. All right. And so first question, because I could ask about hierarchies a lot, I think, but like, first question is, when you're thinking about trying to improve your hierarchy data, so you actually know that like this account family is like pretty consistently defined and all of that, any tips or like recommendations for how to actually tackle that problem effectively, that you actually know what the hierarchies are, who the ultimate parents are, and kind of how that all fits together?
Yeah, where I typically start is using DNB's data. Dunn's numbers give you a lot of the connections between things, and it'll tell you who's the ultimate parent, if they have an ultimate domestic parent, so you can figure out the country-specific level details. And I remember being at Dreamforce a long time ago, and there's a big company that went up there and they presented how they used DNB's data as the main source, but then they did a lot of their own research and like the cleanup, because just like any other data source, DNB is going to be outdated on some things, and also using some redirect things. So we go to the website and it's actually taking us now to GE. Okay, GE bought them, making sure that we've got those hierarchies cleaned up. So it's a big piece, because if you build out this territory and half the companies in Jimmy's territory are actually owned by somebody else, you've blown up your whole stuff. So it's one of those things you have to get right. So traction is, you know, layered on top of the DNB data. Those are the best ones that I've used. I'm sure there's others out there, but that's at least the approach that I would take, is you've got to find some way to get that stuff cleaned up, because downstream there's too many impacts for what that'll look like.
And so even if you've got the data perfect, which of course will never happen, but let's just pretend for a second that that's actually the case, right? You then have a lot of questions on ROE and how you should actually think about assignments in the hierarchy, right? Like you mentioned the global ultimate parent, the like domestic ultimate parent, those types of things. What would you recommend to someone who's really trying to figure out how do I think through rules of engagement on hierarchies?
Yeah, it typically comes down to a couple of scenarios. It's the cross country kind of things. It's cross state if you're at that level where there's regional kinds of things, and then there's some of these big multi brand types of companies. How do you want to treat that? You have to make a decision early on. So all those things rolling out for Black and Decker has Stanley, and they have the how do you want to treat those? Especially again, if you have like a GE, but then you have a public sector component. Well, there is a public sector part of that. So how do you treat those? These are all the decisions. Again, when you go to the strategy, the initial strategy, this is how we want to approach all these different things. You have to make a decision. Otherwise, and then a lot of it too is the industry classifications don't typically always work for your business. If you're using your NAICS and SIC codes, some of those things for these multi-brand places just don't make any sense. Like, I don't know what Apple is classified as or Amazon. Amazon might be e-commerce. You're gonna tell me like, Redshift is e-commerce? No, it's a data thing. So, and it's a totally different space. So you have to have some way of delineating. This is kind of the criteria that we've identified, that these are the MNCs, and this is the way that we're going to approach it. And you have to do that early on. Otherwise, you're just going to have so many issues. So I'd say you have that definition, trying to like eliminate the exceptions. You may even have, okay, these are the explicitly called out hierarchies in your ROE that say, okay, Apple is treated this way, Amazon is treated this way, GE is treated this way. Others, this is kind of the blanket approach that we're taking to be really explicit with some of those things. But you do have to define it. It's got to be in your ROE. Otherwise, you're going to have reps fighting constantly over who owns which part of the divisions.
One of the things in a past life when I was running RevOps was I reported into the COO, and that was really good because basically I existed in this demilitarized zone between sales and finance, and we needed it at the time because they were not getting along, and so I found myself adjudicating ROE issues actually through a kind of a complex M&A situation that we were going through, right? And it was not a lot of fun to deal with all of that. And so, one of the things that I learned from that experience is that no matter what sensible rules you make up at the beginning, like you are gonna get hit with exceptions. Some of them reasonable, some of them not, and those are easy to bat down. But how do you think about dealing with the fact that no territory carve is going to be perfect? Like there will be mistakes. Like this account probably should have gone over here because we didn't have the data right or whatever. How do you think about a process to manage that on an ongoing basis to ensure that, as much as possible, a territory design can kind of self-heal? Have you seen any good practices around managing that you could share?
Yeah, so go back to the first one. We would always just document like those exceptions to make it an exception, not a precedent.
Right.
That's a big one. That okay, well,
I like that.
John, you get his, and this is why I should get the same thing. Putting that into ROE is a big piece. Um, yeah, I think you kind of present it in a way as you're going into Q1 that okay, this is where we're at. There may still be changes to it. So I've hated seeing comp plans go out and say this is what your territory is. Then you're kind of locked in from a contractual standpoint. So avoiding that, like, hey, you're going to get a list of accounts assigned to you by the company. That's it. Like, we don't need to do a named thing because there might be issues with it. So that's one. Two is you've got some sort of a buffer. Like there's going to be a little bit of an unevenness in every territory regardless. So hey, we tried to get everybody around X of potential in their patch, and there's still going to be hopefully you've got enough space in the territories, and especially if you're growing, you might have 10 reps now, but you carved 20 territories because you've got 10 open heads that you're going to be hiring for throughout the year. So you want to be able to have that, and you figure out like how do you manage the temporary coverage on those things. But you could pull some of those accounts over. To make sure if somebody starts to get a big shortfall because, hey, we just took out 20% of their territory because of whatever this issue was, that we've got some other way to replace it. And then you can go look at, okay, who's inheriting that? How can we start to even out and spread the stuff out? Because if we give that to you and you've got 20%, 30% more potential than everybody else, and we tried to set it to be even, then obviously that's not fair to the rest of the sellers. Okay, this is where we're going to have to move it. So it's kind of go back to your horse trading comment. If you had that, we wouldn't have given you these other ones, and these are potential replacement ones that we would take out to put those ones in. That's at least what I've done in the past. Was it the best thing? I don't know. You kind of have to make a decision and move on. And you with all this, you try to get as scientific as you can, but it does a lot of the qualitative, quantitative piece. You kind of have to hope that things work out well and that you take whatever those learnings are and apply them to the next time you do a territory plan.
It's funny we're using terms like precedent and things like that, right? There's almost this, and with comp plans and stuff, there is sort of a semi like legalistic aspect to it, right? So you kind of have to, you gotta manage these processes somewhat carefully. I've always said that when I was doing that ROE adjudication, that I realized that if I ever needed to be represented at the Supreme Court, I want my lawyer to be a rep who believes that they've been wronged, because they are good at what they do. But uh, I want to talk about you. You also mentioned something else that's come up several times in the conversation: potential. Early on in the conversation, you talked about something that I've seen lots of folks do, which is, hey, we're allocating accounts based on their spend today. Well, okay, so, somebody at Amazon put $30 on a credit card, right? Are you giving that to your SMB rep? Well, no, because there's massive expansion potential, right? And so one of the big kind of pseudoscientific things that goes into territory planning is trying to get to that potential number, right? So, we talked about the data challenges with hierarchies and how to address those things, but potential becomes another one of those things where you've got to get a sense of, where are we at with the account today? Is it zero? Are they a brand new prospect? Are they spending a few $100? Are they spending $10 million? Whatever the case may be. And then what is that? What could it be above and beyond that? So that's something I see a lot of folks struggle with. What do you recommend people do to come up with a reasonable calculation for that, especially if they're in a, I don't know, series B or C or something? They don't have like a huge like data science team they can throw at these problems. Like, what would you recommend that they do to try to get to a reasonable potential number?
Yeah, in the end, it's going to be a proxy and it's going to be an estimate, and it could be wrong. And so you kind of look at what do you see in your data? Is there a way that you can tell, hey, this is for this size company in this industry in this geo? Like, what are the characteristics kind of even out where you don't have this big distribution of there's people spending, or the people like, you don't think we can sell a lot to they can spend a ton. So try to figure out like, are there certain segments, and then try to apply some sort of scoring to that. If you can get down to, if it's an employee-based thing for like payroll, how many employees do they have? You just multiply it by your thing. Or we sold to the data office one place, and we used LinkedIn Sales Insights. It's different than Sales Navigator. Sales Insights is basically giving you like all the counts. So like how many data like titles does this company have? And we would look at, okay, it says there's 1,200 data science people. They've only contracted for 100. Okay, it's 1,100 times. And you just give a pricing kind of thing. You're not trying to apply your pricing model to it, because it's the number you're spitting out is fake anyways, right? So just having some sort of a proxy for this is how we're estimating the potential of these accounts. And then you have to go and look at it. Because again, the data side of it, if you come out and you've got this account that's, got a $100 million potential, and that that's not even close to reality, you have to go back and clean some of that stuff up, whether it's the assumption is wrong, the data point that put it in wrong, or, hey, we actually have to max this out because we have enterprise contracts at 75,000, whatever those things are. You start to just iterate on that just as you do anything else, but try to find some way to categorize the potential. Otherwise, the other things I've seen are just like the points based things. So okay, if they're in this industry, which is our best, they get 5. If they're in these other ones, they get a 4. And you try to build up to a point system from that standpoint, and then evenly distribute those things. You score things out. Hey, we want to have so many A accounts for everybody, and certain number of Bs, and they get points. So those are a few of the different approaches I've seen. But again, a lot of this stuff, if you're a smaller company, it's hard. You don't have a lot of customers. You don't have a whole team of data people to go and do a lot of the cleanup. So it's going to be a lot of proxy and estimation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I think a lot about when I think about data is a lot of it, especially early on in a business, if you're not a large scale business that has tons of historical data, you're going to get ambiguous answers, right? It's very, very vanishingly rare that you ever like do an analysis around segmentation or a sensitivity analysis or something like that, and something just like you're not going to ever get to statistical significance. The data is not going to tell you exactly what to do. The data is going to like hint, all right? And so I think it's always really challenging to take those hints and make big strategic decisions based on those best estimates that are moderately informed. You have your good guesses about a lot of stuff, right? And then that leads me to something that we haven't really touched on, which is the actual mechanics of the carve itself. Like, so you mentioned the kind of iceberg, right? It's like the data, the strategy, all of that stuff. It's, iceberg, or if you want to use like a house foundation metaphor, like that's the foundation, right? But then when it actually comes to materializing all those decisions into an actual territory design, how did you actually get from like, this is our strategy, this is the things we think we want to balance on, these are the revenue potentials, to I'm presenting like this scenario to someone? I feel like we skip over that a lot when we talk about this. It's like all the big business, like, the strategy stuff. And then like, oh, and here's your territory. It's based on that. But like, there's actually kind of a big missing piece in there of the work that gets done. And so I'm curious, when it comes time to roll up your sleeves and translate the big ideas and the data into an actual carve, like what does that effort look like for you?
Yep. So again, it all depends on those other conversations early on. Are you doing it a geo-based approach? Is it going to be vertical? So that's the first like slash of, okay, if we want to have, carve out our public sector, okay, now we've got our public sector, and then we figure out how do we want to break those things out. Do we want to do it for like state level versus federal level? Do we want to do it like, so however you're going to break out those different things, you have to get tactical and like, okay, how many accounts do we have in each one of these territories? Go back to your capacity side. How many of these accounts can each of these reps handle? So you start to map some of those things. You take into account, do we want to limit the rep turnover? So they're working with Hayes now, and they're going to work with Joe next year. Like, do we want to limit that? The holdover pieces, you pull those things out. So that's static. That's going to stay in somebody's patch. And then I've used now Salesforce bottom, like Salesforce maps is one alternative. Okay, we start to draw the maps. Okay, this is what's going to give me filter out the pieces that are excluded from that. Okay, give me X number of territories, and it can spit it out for you. And then you have to fix it because it's going to carve like Kansas and Missouri, and then Kansas City is like crossing over both. So you start to do the iterations on that, and you start to work with managers on it. If you're doing it in Excel, then you start with kind of like a VLOOKUP kind of thing of, okay, these accounts are going to stay with this person. If it doesn't have that, okay, then the next criteria is going to go like this. You get some pivot tables, or you do some charts of like, this is what it looks like. You try to do this stuff in Salesforce. If you want to give like different fields for like scenario 1 goes to this is the owner. So it's definitely painful, and it's not fun, and you're going to do it multiple times. So
Right.
that's why I think just the tool level type of stuff. We used another platform that you say, hey, evenly distribute this segments stuff based on whatever the criteria were that kind of got them down to that level. Give an even spread of the accounts, focusing on the domestic parent or the ultimate parent kind of things. And you just take that's going to be your first pass. And then you're
Right.
going to start to do all the movement with it. So whether it's Excel and you're working with something there. If you're using Salesforce, you want to have like the different like scenario one, scenario two, scenario three as different fields, and let managers start to tweak some of those things. Obviously, snapshot all of it and like and capture the history. So if somebody steals a bunch of stuff, you can track down what happened. But it is absolutely painful with those.
Yeah.
That's why the spreadsheet piece is it's undefeated, but also you lose some of the audit ability of this is what changed from period to period.
So, I mean, one of my hypotheses around this is that because that process is very painful, we often don't explore as many options as we might. You've been talking about scenarios here, right? And I think one of the challenges when we're talking about a scenario, when I think of scenario, and you can tell me if this is the way you're thinking of it, it's like, hey, we've got this strategy that we want to do, like enterprise segment, and then we're thinking like, hey, we want to test what would it look like if we balanced on this revenue potential up to a certain number, or what would it look like if we did something that was like more geo oriented. You want to compare and contrast those, but it becomes such a manual effort to build scenario one and scenario two and scenario three that, I think what happens a lot of times is folks like they get tired basically as an organization after like one scenario or two scenarios. They're like, okay, well, we're just going to go with that. Do you have any recommendations on like how many scenarios you might want to consider before you call it and say like, this is what we should do?
My saying is always a choice of one is not a choice. So
Okay.
at least have a second. And that could be, hey, we're just going to do, top accounts. And then another one might be, okay, we're going to do this, but we want Jimmy to really focus on this part of like the accounts that match this criteria for this team kind of a thing. So try to get some sort of focus. So whatever that is, at least give yourself two options of it and then see, go and get the response. Yeah, if you have that one option, and it is terrible, it's painful. That's why nobody likes to do it. That's why people do it one time a year, because it is so much work. But if you don't give yourself at least another view of, hey, this is what it could potentially look like, and this is why this might be a good idea, then yeah, you're just gonna go with whatever the default was.
Before we wrap up here, I want to just zoom out just a little bit. We've gotten into a bunch of different pieces, the data, the strategy, all of that. One thing that I think is really important is thinking strategically about what kind of territory do we even want to have, right? We've kind of glanced around at this and but we haven't really addressed it full on, right? I'll share how I think about the world, but I'm curious how you think about it. Is like, I think of this sort of territory like taxonomy, like a family tree, right? And on one side of the family tree is what I think of as like the sort of traditional, like static once a year carve kind of approaches, right? What we've been talking about. So geo being the probably most common one, or the ones people think of the default and where the word territory comes from, right? Verticals are probably the next. And then I would say named accounts, like especially in enterprise or strategic or account management type motion. Those tend to be, in my mind, kind of the main sort of flavors of static. And then on the other side of the family tree, I think is more dynamic models. I think there's sort of two of those. One is what is essentially like not really a territory, but more like a round robin, like your early stage. And it's just like, as things come in, we just kind of allocate them. And then the final one is one near and dear to my heart is dynamic books. The idea that you try to define the territories based on like a book of accounts that's capacity bounded, and have the idea that reps will work a focused book of say 100 accounts at any given point in time, but have the ability to, as you said earlier, like check in or check out. We think of it as like a return, like I take this account out of my name, I get a new account distributed to me. That's the family tree as I see it. But I'm curious, when you're thinking about presenting a menu of options to sales leadership and saying, here are our choices for how we might define territories. How do you think about that? And what are the big choices you want to make as far as, how you might balance things out there? Do you see a similar family tree, or do you have others in mind?
And I agree with that. I think that you have a constraint when it comes down to how do you manage and maintain and administer plans. So if you don't have RevOps yet, maybe the territory geo-based thing or the round robin as the easiest.
Right.
If you have another way to be able to manage that, then absolutely. I think that to me there's so much benefit of focus. if you've, I remember first time I did cut territories, some of these reps had 3,000, 4,000 accounts. That's what's not getting worked. 3,000, 4,000 accounts. They're going to be working, 40, 50 of them, right? So I think making sure that going back to the TAM down to the ICP to the like the ones that are going to be the most likely to buy in the next 6, 12, 18 months. If you can get your sellers to also spend their time and effort on those things, I think there's just so much of a benefit from the effort side of that they're not going to be wasting time on low propensity accounts. Oh, you can handle the inbound. That's the other flip side of this is, okay, if you're going to have this focus thing, okay, how do we handle the other stuff that's going to come inbound? So you want to make sure you qualify that and you manage those. But think about how much better your win rate is going to be if you're not spending time on these accounts that aren't likely to close anytime soon. Remember the late great Jim Ninabaji at Serious Decisions, like we don't need a 3x pipeline if we know that we're only working the accounts that are going to buy. We need a 1x.
Right.
So why are you going to spend three times the amount of time, 4 times the amount of time on accounts that aren't going to sell? So I think there's such a benefit from focus. So if you're there yet, and you've got product market fit, and we know this is who buys our product, this is the messaging that we use, this is how we competitively position ourselves, then I think that the focus is a great thing. If you're earlier on and you're still trying to figure out, okay, what is the problem in the market? How do we position our product? Is there enough pain for this? Those types of things. You're more like a problem market fit kind of a thing. Sell to anybody. Like you don't know what good looks like yet. You're still doing experimentation versus a company that's further along. And if you get to like platform market fit, where they're, hey, we've got a ton of products. We know most of our growth is coming from customers. Totally different world where you can have, okay, this is what my book is. I'm trying to expand into these 10, 15, 20 accounts. It's another named kind of a thing. But earlier on, I think once you're able to focus on the best accounts, that's where I would direct you. But if not, the territory, the geo-based stuff, the industry verticalization, those types of things, they're easy. People can understand them. They're easy to administer. You can easily do your lead routing. So there's all those other considerations. But as soon as you're able to, try to get that focus as much as possible.
All right. Well, Joe, I really appreciate the time today. It's been a great conversation. So, anything you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I love talking about this kind of stuff. This is great. If anybody needs help with their revenue operations, you can check us out. We've got a lot of great content trying to keep up with Hayes at www.revopsinflection.com. We've got the blog there, going with a lot of content that's strategic and tactical as well.
All right. Well, thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
All right.